So you want to tackle climate change, but you're trying to increase the population of Canada. The two don't make sense. If you wanted to reduce the main cause of climate change, according to you, you would reduce the number of human beings in Canada, not increase. Myth number one. And using the media to produce your message tells anybody all they need to know. All they need to know. A government-funded weather channel promoting climate change and what we evil human beings must endure to stop it. Do you really think human beings can stop your climate change? Do you really think we're that powerful?
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing ground.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio, and this is The Morning Moment. We're on weekdays, 11:45 Eastern. Follow us on Spreaker.com and click on the like button. This piece I want to play for you to extend my comments on Catherine McKenna, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, in case you had forgotten. I'm playing this piece from the Beck show. The link will be on my site. He had a well-known person on his program recently by the name of Joe Bastardi. This man is extremely well known in the United States. He's a weatherman with incredible experience, and he knows the weather. Explaining to Beck and others, namely us, the listeners, that we really don't know what the weather is going to be from one day to the next, with any real degree of accuracy, even today. And to be more precise than that would in fact be disingenuous. As I said, this is another piece in my continuing expose of Catherine McKenna here in Canada, who refuses to admit there could be an alternate explanation to the weather. Because, as you will hear from Joe in his own words, these climate experts always comment on what the weather has been, not what it will be. Example, it snowed today, climate change. Heavy thunderstorm, climate change. Very hot, climate change. Here's the piece.
So at the website weatherbell.com, Joe Bastardi is there. And he is the chief meteorologist for Weather Bell. He is the author of the Climate Chronicles. He is a guy who was wildly accredited and wildly just one of the most quoted and one of the best weather guys and meteorologists that we had in the country until climate change. Then, of course, when he went, wait a minute, I actually do this for a living. I am a scientist, and none of this works. That's when he started to find himself in hot water. He is still on the same bandwagon saying, this Green New Deal, this is going to kill America and just wreak havoc and hurt every American. We have Joe joining us now. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for having me. I've always wanted to chit-chat with you. We've done it a couple of times, but This time a little bit longer.
You have looked into the Green New Deal, and how long did it take you to figure out this has nothing to do with climate?
Well, I wrote the book on that. For those of you, I always tell people, go look at the book, and if you don't like it, then on a cold winter night, you can throw it in the fireplace and it'll help heat your house, because we want to make sure that you get that. But and book burning can be popular today, and I'm sure mine is. But here's in 2015, when the former EPA administrator Gina McCarthy was testifying before Congress, she agreed with the idea that the proposals being made would only save 0.01 Celsius over 30 years, but she said the real benefits are that we're going to show the planet what you're supposed to do. Now, I'm sitting here going, well, look, America's the most prosperous country of the world, greatest experiment in freedom. If the rest of the planet hasn't followed us there, why are they going to sit there and start following us now?
Right.
I mean, it doesn't make sense. But let me put this in perspective for you, because perspective, and see, the problem is that my father, who's a meteorologist, graduated out of Texas A&M in '65. I always go down to Texas. But in any case, he taught me that the foundation you stand on today was built yesterday to reach for tomorrow. And so when you look back at the weather and what the weather and climate has done, not only in this country, but in the entire world, you sit there and it's almost as if it's a shooting fish in a barrel when these people bring, oh, this is the worst ever. You know, and that's one of the biggest things, that I rely on looking at patterns in the past. You know, I tell people I don't have any life except my good Lord above, my family, weather, and Penn State wrestling. That's about all I have. So most of the time it's with wrestling. But listen to this. The U.S. is currently only responsible for 15% of the man-made CO2, 15%. Mankind is responsible for 0.01% of that. So let's do the math. It means that the U.S. contribution to the CO2 total of the atmosphere is 0.00015 of the atmosphere. And what's the Green New Deal solution? Destroy the American economy. I mean, really, because we all know that energy is the lifeline of our economy. Now, I'm not against any energy. And as a matter of fact, my company, we develop products for wind and solar to make those forecasts more accurate. Because, you know, we had a situation in Texas, Glenn, for instance, I guess it was 2011, where you had a big freezing rainstorm in West Texas where all the wind turbines are. And, you know, you needed heat for Dallas and Houston, and the wind turbines can't turn. Well, if a power company knows that there's that threat 4 or 5 days away, they may acquire energy from another power company that's not having that kind of way. So this is what I do. I have nothing against alternative energy. And this argument to me is not an argument like, for instance, I know and understand the other side of the argument. And I keep telling people on my side of the argument, until such a time that the planet actually starts to cool, they have every right in the world, and you should be open-minded to what's going on. But here's the big thing. The total picture, if you look at the geological history of the Earth, it's the totality of the journey, not 6 seconds out of an 80-year-old man's life, which is what the last 40 years has been. You think about that stuff, and you look back, you think about the sun, the oceans, stochastic events, the very design of the system, and that gets them mad because it means that I believe in God very, very strongly. So what happens is you look at those things and you say, well, wait a minute. Why is this the first time in known history that man is wrecking the climate? Now, let me just say one more thing, because I'm open-minded. I realize this is your show. If I could have wrestled the way I talk, I would have been a national champ. But listen, what happens is this. If they are correct, it's very seductive, because if you're the guy that found out that CO2 was a climate control knob, you're like Galileo, for goodness sakes. So and how do you, after 30 see, I'm very empathetic, sympathetic, whatever that word is. It's got too many syllables for me. But what happens is, if you've been doing this for 30 years, you now own it. It becomes your life. And if it becomes your life, what happens if someone attacks your idea? They're attacking your life. And you know, there's also a lot of people on the other side that are reaching for the higher plane. So when you look at that, I tell people I'm trying to be the dumbest man in the room, because the dumbest man in the room, if you're hungry, is going to find the food, right? So you look everywhere. If you're the smartest guy in the room and all you're doing is looking at one thing, you're not going to see the very things that challenge you that you need to perfect your arguments. And so that's the way I am. I realized a long time ago that the weather is an infinite, majestic system that, and the more I learn about the field, the less I know about it in the totality of it. There's a book out there called The Half-Life of Facts about how fast knowledge is expanding. And when you look at those things, it gives you a perspective of humility and understanding that, sorry, you're not controlling the whole shooting match.
I mean, I just don't understand how, if you really care about the environment, you should be A, vegan, B, for nuclear power plants, and you should be looking to the free market system, because it's the free market system that is developing all of these things. Everything the government has tried to do fails.
Solyndra was pretty good.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that makes me, in the book, most of, for instance, is a chapter in there called "The Weaponization of the Weather." And that was put out a year ago, saying this is what's going to happen. Every single event is going to be like that, because when you look at it, the scientific argument is the same argument: who's better, Texas or Texas A&M in football, right? It lasts about 10 minutes, and then you move on. But what happens is this, and this is why I said the book is a love story, because what I have loved since I was 3 years old. I mean, I remember my parents telling me I was 3. I used to sneak outside, lie on my back, and stare at the sun through the clouds. I almost burned my retinas out. That's how fascinated I was with the weather from being a little kid. So when you see this dragged through the mud, and you see everybody, where were you when, I was 15 years old crying because we missed a snowstorm in Atlantic City, for instance? You weren't anywhere to be found. And one of the other things that gets me is that they come out after the fact. Now, Glenn, you've been down there for a while. You guys have been down there for a while. After 2012, there were a lot of people saying, oh, this is the beginning of a new Dust Bowl, the new perma-drought, right? Because you had 3 straight years of and it was just like 52 through 54, which I know about because growing up down at Texas A&M, I know about the Junction Boys and how bad the weather was in 52, 53, 54. And like clockwork, 4 years later, it turned around then, and it turned around now. So I'm seeing stuff, I guess it was USA Today had today. Well, this is a sign of climate change, all the wet weather. Well, what answer don't you own? If it snows cheese in Dallas on New Year's Eve, that's climate change too. So this is what's going on. They wait till after the fact and say, see that? And, in the weather and forecasting and in the private sector, what WeatherBell does, we have to tell people the why before the what and hit the forecast. Because you want to know something? National Weather Service is great. There's 1,700 private companies out there by guys that are real sharp people. And if you're not right, you're not going to get paid. So I use everything I have at my disposal, including understanding and knowing the past, to project into the future. And that's not what I'm seeing on the other side. I see a climatologist who say, well, this is a sign of this or this is a sign of that. Well, why didn't you tell me this was going to happen back in February?
Correct.
Right? You take what's going on now. The reason we have so many tornadoes is because it's so cold across much of the country. 2008, 2011, and this year were the three coldest Mays in the northern plains and back into the southwest that we've recorded in the last 15 years. Well, guess where the tornado spikes are? Well, if you get a cold May, you're naturally getting warmer air coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. You're going to get big fights going on, and that's what you got. But that's not because it's just warm everywhere. Last May was warm all over the United States, and we had a record low amount of tornadoes in the month of May. As a matter of fact, folks, there is ample reason to believe that the greening of the planet, which is occurring, and Dr. Will Happer talks about this all the time, that we're basically coming out of a CO2 drought, right? Plants grow better at 4 times the amount of CO2 in the air. What is the synergistic relationship between animal and plants? Since animals exhale 100 times more CO2 than they inhale, and plants then take that and grow from it. So we're coming out of that. So the demonization of CO2, or, for instance, guys, what's the average temperature of the planet? What's the perfect temperature of the planet? I mean, they say hottest year ever. Well, wait a minute. It's only the mean temperature is 57.5, 58 degrees. How's that hot, right? What if it's 58.5? What does that mean for Dallas? Oh, it doesn't mean that Dallas is going to be 115 degrees every day, right? So it's back and forth and natural.
Joe Bastardi is his name, and he is the author of the new book, The Climate Chronicles. Been out for a while, really good. Climate Chronicles. If you want the facts on the Green New Deal, on what climate change really is, what this is all about, the facts to be able to argue it, you'll get them from Joe and his new book, The Climate Chronicles. Joe, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again.
Very convenient that everything is always climate change, and never its true condition, natural weather conditions. for this time of year. Never do any of these people ever for one moment want to stop and think for one moment that it could all possibly be perfectly natural, a natural occurrence for our planet. No, no, no. There's no way that couldn't possibly be. But here's that dirty little secret that they don't want you to know. If you expose their real agenda, and agenda actually really is the operative word, this has very little to do with climate and much, much more to do with imposing, in our case in Canada, Agenda 2030 from the United Nations, which is nothing more than a redistribution of wealth of the Western nations to poorer countries in Africa and alike. Where were we ever asked that question? Answer, no, we weren't. Did we want to redistribute our wealth? We were never asked. Never asked. Yet they impose draconian taxes so that they can hand bundles of cash to these third world dictatorships and backward warlike nations fighting among themselves, increasing their populations with no means of understanding how to feed, clothe or educate their societies. But always, and this is a key thing here, always having enough money for weapons and genocide. Since when did it become our responsibility in the West to build up their countries? When was it up to the Western countries who were thrown out of these continents, like Africa, to provide all that we have to feed, clothe and educate them? Now that may be harsh, but it's these left-wing parties that we in the West have suffered under for decades that create nothing but squalor in the world. Nothing but squalor. It's time, in our case, that we took our country back and looked after our citizens first and suggested the United Nations do whatever they want, but leave us the hell alone. You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab and email. We are also on Spotify. Just go to the podcast section and type Canadian Politics with a twist and you'll find us. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass on the links. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all our morning moments at Spreaker.com under A Radio. That's EHRADIO, A Radio. And please click on the like button. And you can now hear a weekend review of our podcasts on WHBJ DB, News Talk Radio. Join us and many others. And you can find all our podcasts and morning moments at aradio.wordpress.com. Click on the Morning Moments tab.